So this is a modern question. And this is the reason why this is a modern question. It's basically a question saying, I only have limited time, so if I meditate for 15 minutes, what do I do, right? And so let me give you a human answer to a modern question. And so here's a human answer is, Joe, if I asked you, if you had to only pick one part of your body, and you could only keep that one part of your body, which part would you choose? Your heart? And so if you didn't have a brain and if you didn't have the rest of your body, you'd be just satisfied with the heart. Okay. Does this answer, I mean, I know it doesn't really answer your question from one aspect, but does it answer your question? How, in some ways, ridiculous that question actually is. But it's not. It's a valid question, and I understand the pain and where it's coming from. Feeling like you only have a limited amount of time. In a limited amount of time, what do you do? Right? And the reason I started here making it sound completely ridiculous is because thinking from that aspect, you will never find a solution. That's the reason why. The paradigm itself is incorrect for a human being. You will never, as a human being, find a solution there, if that makes sense. Because you cannot compartmentalize yourself in that manner, right? And so having said that, yes, we have the issue of having a concentrated time of 15 minutes, but it becomes a bigger issue of how do you lead your life? And so is your life your cultivation, or are you trying to change your life from 15 minutes? Right? And so it becomes actually a more difficult question, or an easier answer, actually, in some ways. And so let me paint the picture. 15 minutes out of the day is if it was an hour, it'd be 1/24th. So 15 minutes is like, okay, so it's a hundredth of a day. Thank you. So if you try and change your life from a hundredth of a day, we have a challenge in our hands because we have other inputs. So you have other inputs. So we call that training. So every moment of your life is training. So you're training something every moment. The question is not a matter of whether you're training or not training. The question is a matter of what are we training in that moment, right? So that's a real question. The real question is, what are you training in the moment? Because we're training something. So that's the bigger challenge. So we practice agonizing. We practice rushing, right? And I mean, we practice, being paranoid. We practice worrying. I mean, you name it. And we practice being uncertain all the time. And we practice it with faith and fervor. Fervor, thank you. So we practice it with faith and fervor. I mean, right? I mean, we're committed to a miserable life. So, right? But then at the same time, there's a part of us that believes that we're not. And I'm going to say, well, if you're really not, then show it to me with the rest of your life. With the rest of your life. Not from the 15 minutes. Because that 15 minutes is really not going to do something. If you have a monk whose entire life is dedicated to peace, being calm, you name it, and then practices being miserable 15 minutes of their life, is it going to work? That monk's going to fail miserably at trying to be miserable. Right? I mean, it's going to be like very tough. Like, I'm going to try and worry 15 minutes. The reverse picture is just as true as this picture, right? And so, now, some of us, as I say this, is, well, we're not monks. We live in the real world. right? And what I'm going to say is that that may be true, but there are some people who still live in this real world that has a marked difference. And I can tell you that from my own personal experience, that your life can be significantly different. But each moment has to be filled with what it is that you're seeking. Each moment has to be filled. And so it doesn't really matter. You know, my biggest training ground, I have to say, was basically my daytime job. You have a dedicated 8-hour to 9-hour, well, it's really not 8 hours. That's actually what's on paper. But really, it's actually more like 9-hour to 10-hour days. And during that 9-hour to 10-hour day, that probably was my richest training ground. It was my richest training ground, where each moment, you know, I got to see, I had to come back. I had to look at my soul. At lunchtime, I'd be looking at my soul. I'll tell you when I was. At lunchtime, I'd be looking at my, I didn't socialize during lunchtime. That was a very significant time. I just battled halfway through. And at halftime, I'm wondering how I'm going to battle the next half. How I'm going to train the next half. And then I have an entire time coming back from work, a drive, it's called the drive, wondering, wow, how I'm going to train tomorrow so that when something like that happens again, I won't rush. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? You know, I call myself a tai chi practitioner. I call myself a Christian. I call myself all these different things. I have all these different spiritual tools. And then, right in the moment, it seems like some of these things go straight out the window. Right? I mean, I'm like, I was unkind just back then there. I actually rushed. I mean, okay, so these things, I mean, just don't work. So I started thinking about this during those lunch times. I had allocated out about 2 hours of my, I still do actually, 2 hours of my time where I'd just be looking at these things. Because I personally don't want these things in my life. And I fought for those 2 hours. When I first started, I didn't have 2 hours. I fought for 2 hours. And I claimed my 2 hours. And from those 2 hours, I started claiming the rest of my life. And what I'd like to say is that in the 15 minutes, what I'd like to say is that claim something in the 15 minutes that will actually allow you to claim the rest of your life. Even when you're sleeping. Even when if you're wondering how to do that if you're sleeping, then I'm going to ask you, look at what you're doing an hour before you sleep. Because it's going to affect the rest of your sleep. Actually, if you want to be really thorough, look at what you do 3 hours before you sleep, because it's going to affect how you sleep. I don't have nightmares anymore, and that's the reason why. If you watch what you do before you sleep, you don't have nightmares. You have very pleasant dreams. You go to bed like this. So I give a different answer to the question you were asking. And if you do what I just said, then those 15 minutes actually will become clear to you. Because if you have I'll tell you what I do if I have a 15-minute. Let me rephrase that. I can tell you right now exactly what I would do if you gave me 15 minutes. Because I have the rest of my life planned out. Or I live in my virtual monastery, if you will. So I know that that wasn't the answer to your question.
That answer makes the question.
Thank you.